I totally understand that I was probably super quiet in my first video, so I'm doing my best to make this work and talk at a normal volume, but I have my roommate asleep right there and my wife asleep back there. So don't count on that, but we're gonna do our best to make it work. This is a sock on the microphone. Absolutely. This is maybe a little bit too far in the DIY direction, but the pops are coming out really weird, and I would just want to see if it worked. I'm not even sure if it does, because this is just kind of what I'm rolling with now. There's going to be so much to edit out here. I'm so sorry, Future Dart. So sorry. Today we're going to be talking about one of the greatest post-punk bands to ever grace the world and how they burned just bright enough to inspire an entire generation of later bands. The story of Big Black is full of fireworks, curse words, and electronic drum beats, as well as maybe not the most appropriate subject matter for songs, but we're going to dissect as much of their tale as I can to the greatest extent of my power. Big Black is maybe my favorite band I've ever heard. Keep in mind, I spent the last 10 years of my life hopelessly devoted to Queens of the Stone Age, so the odd stuff was always in my ears. They inspired countless bands and musicians, including Nirvana, Hole, Chat Pile, and a great many others. But the second I played my first Big Black record, I've been nothing but a twisted husk of fun facts and admiration. Let's get some of that out right now. Santiago Durango is laying on the couch of the Coach House in Chicago, Illinois, trying to mind his business and sleep off the constant debate in his head regarding what direction he should focus himself in. Musical virtuosity or simplistic artistic malice. For him, the thoughts in his head can't touch ground because a fuzzy torrent of metallic screams are blaring through the house's floor. Disgruntled and annoyed, Santiago walks down the basement steps and opens the cellar door to be greeted by the unassuming skeleton frame of Steve Albini, who's holding a guitar that is strapped around his waist instead of hanging on his shoulder. Next to him, swinging his bass through the empty air, is Jeff Pizzati. Between these two is a Roland TR-606 drum machine, which is still spitting out fat drops of bass drum and snare hits in a constant, monotonous stream. Santiago Durango realizes that he has two options. He could scream at the guys to turn it down, or he could walk himself right back up those stairs, grab his own guitar and amp, and join in. Santiago chose the latter. Big Black officially began with only a single member, that being Steve Albini. Freshly kicked from a bass player position in the band's stations, Albini is now walking around his dorm room with a drum machine strapped around his torso, playing with as many different beats as he can. Late at night, Albini fires up a 4-track and lays down 6 tracks, which ultimately will make up Big Black's first record, Lungs. Featuring his roommate's screams and a saxophone, Lungs falls by the wayside and a lot of chatter around Big Black, but you have to start somewhere. It's mean, it's crass, and badass in the way that only a snot-nosed nerd can be. Now, I'll probably talk a little bit about the tracks and which ones are good, because I have gone back through all the records in an attempt to at least have an opinion on a lot of the songs, but it's really hard when the heights of the band later on reach such a position that looking back on some of the lesser stuff, at least in my opinion, it's hard to recognize it as the same band or even want to really mention it or have an opinion or form one. Around this time, Steve Albini had just moved to I think Evanston, Illinois, to start college, and he was fascinated with punk rock. He had heard the Ramones. He talks about it throughout his life. He was never really into music. He never really got it. Eventually he heard the Ramones and realized that music wasn't just about being super intellectual about everything or being even gifted in terms of being able to play your instrument, and he gunned it. So he went to school for journalism in Evanston, Illinois, while also going to Chicago to check out the music scene there. Under the title Big Black, this project would be his first. He explained that the name was really just a reduction of a scary, ominous figure. Yes, a very intellectual journalism major. He shops around the tape, offering it to John Babin, owner of Ruthless Records, in an attempt to find people who might be interested in forming a band around this type of tune. Babin also distributed around 1,500 copies of the album, which contained dollar bills, used condoms, photographs of Bruce Lee, and bloody pieces of paper. After Steve, quote, Couldn't find anybody who didn't blow out of a pig's, including a 13-year-old drummer out in the sticks that he tried to work something out with, but eventually he had to quit the band because the kid had to go into high school, from middle school to high school, and so he couldn't be in the band anymore. So that's kind of sick. But the motor is running, and after torturing poor Santiago with their noise for a bit one day, they now grabbed one of the most influential people in the Chicago music scene. 3 dudes, 1 drum machine, and a packet of firecrackers. Steve Albini is elated. Ever since he moved to Illinois, he had found himself at naked ray gun shows time and time again, and he adored what they brought to music that he hadn't seen before. He's now found himself in a band with 2 members of his favorite local rock act. Now, together, the band convinced a local label called Fever Records to somehow pay them to record another EP. This EP would be Bulldozer. Bulldozer boasts Pat Byrne from Urge Overkill playing drums in tandem with the drum machine this time, who they've now affectionately named Roland. Bulldozer is fine, with the only real standout track for me being Cables and Pigeon Kill. Really, it's got the bones of what it would be, but even the guitar tone isn't exactly the same, at least not yet. It's okay, it's fine, you know, I dig it. But, fun fact, they had actually pressed the initial 200 copies with sheet metal casing. I think it's in reference to something else that was mentioned in an interview. Maybe it was one of the books. But it's still it's amazing that they would do something like that just for a gimmick. Ian Burgess worked as their producer on this and every record Big Black would put out. Albini and Durango talk very highly of Burgess, explaining that he informed a lot of their decisions in recording and would try absolutely any idea that a band cooked up. Burgess served to Albini as the perfect example of what a recording engineer should be, and you can see his influence on a lot of Steve's later work. Bulldozer is out now, and while the crowds are still very slim in Chicago, Big Black is seeing a lot more people buying tickets outside of Illinois. Boys talk about touring as being super easy with a van and 3 guys, as the absence of a drum set relieved a lot of the stress in terms of space and setting up. It's said that a lot of people disliked Big Black because of Steve's reputation in the scene as being a bit of a jerk, and he would write articles reviewing like other local bands and stuff, and he wasn't like always the nicest dude. He also talks about a story where at a party, somebody mistook another person as him, and he watched that dude get dangled off of the rafters of a balcony at like a college frat bro party or something. But it's just kind of funny that people hated him that much that he got to see what would happen if they knew that the person in front of them was him. But Steve reviews this a bit in a couple interviews. He feels that people turned up at their shows in Chicago in fine numbers and didn't feel too snubbed really looking back at that time. There are a couple interviews from the 80s to contest that. The way Steve looks back on it now is different than what it appears it actually was the case. This is one of quite a few discrepancies in the writings by Michael Azerrad and the story of Big Black, and honestly, there's very little I can really do to confirm a lot of what's reality and what's not because of the limited resources I have for research. There is evidence of Albini being banned from the Metro Chicago after talking poorly of the owner and cutting off an avenue for the band there, though. Regardless, legend is just as good as the truth in the case of people who deserve it, and who am I to stand in the way of that? What I can confirm by witness testimonies across Gen X is that firecrackers lit up the stage at nearly every show. So that's pretty sick. Steve is quoted as saying that they're his favorite firework and are entirely underrated. I didn't know there was a ranking system, really. A couple of show attendees remarked that the smoke from the firecrackers would absolutely flood the venues and almost choke everyone out. But they sounded just as good outside as they did inside. So after plotting a self-made tour across the East Coast and Europe, they felt that they had been really shoving that record as far as they could, and the boys sat back in the studio and got working. With the dawn blooming on a new EP from Big Black, they had a sudden change in the lineup. Jeff Pezzati would be leaving Big Black to focus on Naked Ray Gun again. The boys talk about Pezzati pretty highly, and there doesn't seem to be a lot in the way of drama here. But now the door was open for Dave Riley to step in on bass and see what he could do. The boys had seen him play with his prior band Savage Beliefs and offered to jam with him. Dave Riley would be in the band until the very end, and he is praised by Santiago Durango as being the best bass player they could have possibly gotten. Both Albini and Durango look back on Dave Riley as having never got his flowers for being such a powerhouse on the bass, and I have to agree. The difference in tone and playing styles from Pezzati to Riley is immense, and he completed their sound in a way that spoke perfectly to the music. The boys are now 3 men and a robot, and they shoved out their news release Racer X in April of 1985. The title track has been stuck in my head for weeks, so that's definitely the one to play. But Shotgun is my favorite song by a long shot. That song shows just how in time these guys were with each other and how far the band had gone sonically since Cables. Not too far behind this, though, would be the absolute monolith in their discography, at least for me. In 1986, the boys had completed their first full-length record, a 9-song forced fire on vinyl entitled Atomizer. Atomizer is so absolutely estranged from anything else I had listened to prior that I thought it was a new genre of music entirely. The first track I heard when hearing about Big Black was Passing Complexion, which sounds like a futuristic dance pop hit from some underground band from last year. Nothing sounds like this record, and the entire thing is so original and well recorded that you could have pulled out any song and think it was recorded last week if you didn't know any better. The opener, Jordan, Minnesota, is almost everything I never knew I needed guitar music to be. The triplets are going insane, and the lyrics and saw blade guitar is assaulting your ears and brain from minute one. Everybody talks about Kerosene, and it really is an amazing song. Kerosene is mid for me. It feels like any other band could have written that song, you know? And plenty of people have covered it. It's a song that, like, if you bring up Big Black and people know them, that's the song they know. That or Jordan, Minnesota. And it's just, like, it's alright. I get it. I get the hype, at least a little bit, you know? Not really what I come to Big Black for. I skipped the track while playing the record because, like, when you bring it up against Bazooka Joe or a song like Bad Houses, it's just okay. Which Bad Houses is one of the best songs they've ever done, period. Never would have expected something like that from Albini, and I've now heard almost everything the man has done. I mean, the lyrics have Steve written all over them, but the instrumentals are beautiful and well beyond what you'd expect after, like, hearing Racer X. Strange Things is really beaten up by Durango and Albini. It's a track on the end there, right before the live version of Cable. Strange Things is, it's fine. But the way they talk about it in a couple podcast interviews and stuff is like, they really don't like the song. They talk about Strange Thing and they're like, can good sound recording save a bad song? We'll see, or something like that. And it's fine, but it's definitely not horrible. It's just a weirdly battered track. Anyway, Atomizer blows up on the underground and exceeds anything they'd done at that point by a country mile. The record is probably their most well-known and appreciated record, though it didn't sell as well as what would come to be their last album. In the wake of the massive record that was Atomizer, the boys and Robots signed to Touch and Go Records, run by their longtime friend, Corey Russ. The boys struck while the iron was lukewarm and put out a pretty inoffensive, rare for Big Black, EP by the name of Headache. Headache was released initially with photos of a man's shotgun head wound being the cover. Haha, very funny, super clever, boys. To add to the comedy, it was packaged in a cute black plastic package, which Wikipedia refers to as a body bag. I just put that in because I thought it was kind of cute. Adorned on the face of it was a cute little sticker that says more than I can really give you with all the vocabulary in the world. Not as good as Atomizer, so don't get your hopes up, cheat. I don't know if I really dislike the EP. It's definitely a half-sister to Atomizer, with less charm. It's totally fine. It's more of the last record if you loved it. Grinder is probably the best track on here, but you really could throw a dart at any of these tracks and they'll all meet a similar ranking. That being said, with the cover the record has now, it's far easier to see it fitting on a shelf, and people will probably leave with less vomit and trauma. Of course, if you're like the rest of us and you watch snuff films online to keep yourself humble, to keep yourself thinking about where you're going and aware of your surroundings, you'll probably be fine with the original. It was shortly after the release of Headache that Santiago Durango, lead guitarist of Big Black, decided he needed to move on from music. Durango had flirted with the idea of becoming a lawyer before, and seeing as his time in the scene hadn't quite taken off, or didn't feel the way it should to him anymore at this point, he sat the guys down and told them that he would be leaving the band for law school in the next year. Somehow the guys seemed to take it as well as they possibly could have. Albini talks about the revelation from Durango being a relief, and that he's really happy to have the end date of the band now in sight. Keep in mind that as well as managing all the show dates, touring plans, and not fun band stuff, Albini had to wrangle around Dave Riley whenever his drinking got out of hand. Riley is said to have been particularly mean as a drunk, and it didn't sit well with either Durango or Steve. Steve described it as being flashes of brilliance offset by flashes of belligerence. They talk about him really well later on as they got older, but it does seem like the drinking really bothered them And I can see how you don't want to be stuck in a van with a dude who's just beating everything up. Speaking of which, he even supposedly was guilty of giving Roland the drum machine a good smash or two after pounding down a few shots. And you can't have that. Leave Roland alone, you know? There's this really cool live video they have where someone's filming the performance and each of them are wearing fedoras, which didn't age well because, God damn those hats. But Roland didn't get one. One lady in the crowd was particularly upset about that. It was unfair treatment to Roland. Little did she know that Dave Riley was in the parking lot after the show, just taking it out on Roland, just going hand to hand. Quote, "I'm now quite happy to be breaking up. Things are getting much too big and uncontrollable. All along, we've wanted to keep our hands on everything, so nothing happened that we didn't want to. With international and multi-format and multi-territorial stuff, that's proving elusive. I prefer to cut it off rather than have it turn into another gross rock spectacle." That's from Steve. So you can tell, kind of happy about it. So with that also wearing on their backs, I'm sure the boys just saw the writing on the wall and went for it. Dave, Santiago, and Steve were now buckled in for the last hurrah for Big Black. Somewhere between 1986 and 1987, the boys set their pens on tape and spazzed out the last Big Black album. Songs about, I can't say that on this video, songs about blank. A series of tours sprung out while the album went through mixing and vinyl replication across Europe and then the United States. The band played in San Francisco, Providence, Boston, New York City, and Newport, Kentucky, until finally playing their last show on August 9th, 1987 at the Georgetown Steam Plant in Seattle. There exists a rip of the VHS called Pig Pile, which serves as a video compilation of their performances in this last tour. I've seen it a couple times now. It's pretty sick. You get to see the guys in their prime, banging it out. You get to see Steve out of breath with his silly guitar strap setup, and Roland's just blaring through. There's also an AI enhanced version somebody uploaded, and that's really neat looking if you want to check that out too. This would be the last show for their instruments as well, as they were pummeled on stage and destroyed. This, of course, was the show that 14-year-old Kurt Cobain snagged a piece of Steve Albini's smashed guitar, which is probably the most common story you'll find on Big Black from people who have never heard of the band. I get it, the hype around Nirvana touches anyone who ever worked with the band, but there's already enough legend and beauty in Big Black without tying Kurt Cobain tighter to Steve Albini's waist. Soon after, 8,000 copies of Songs About were sent out to stores and found their way into the hands of hundreds of thousands of greasy punks. SAF is by far the most intense the band has been sonically their entire career. There's no passing complexion or bad houses on this record. It's just ripping from the jump and tearing everything apart. It is a toss-up on a good day whether or not Jordan, Minnesota or Independent Trucking is the better album opener for me, but nothing gets me hyped like Independent Trucking, so maybe I'm leaning on that one. It's followed by a Kraftwerk cover that's pretty sick, but Bad Penny is by far my favorite track on the entire plastic disc. SAF is certainly a great record, but to be honest, half of the songs were pretty whatever, and it's always on the B-sides. I can get through them and I love them. As far as like completing the record and finishing that experience, it's like watching a movie. He's just hanging out. Hold on, let me grab my coffee first. Hey. He slipped behind my guitar amp and he just is gonna live there now. He's actually stuck behind my guitar amp. Church, why do you do this to me? I'm sure in a year or two, I'll hail this one as just the superior Big Black experience, but Atomizer is a pinnacle to me. If you were to take some of the songs on SAF and put it on Atomizer instead of tracks like Strange Things and the live version of Cables, it might be the best record that any of the guys ever did. Nay, should I say, belong in a museum. The band was finally dead. While I want to come back to him, Albini went on to focus on his later bands, and Santiago Durango kept on law school while doing a side project called Arsenal. Dave Riley would be in a couple projects after Big Black and was a recording engineer until 1993 when he suffered a stroke. Dave continued running a blog online and put out an autobiography called Blurry and Disconnected. He died in 2019 from squamous cell carcinoma. I wanted to take a minute to remember him in this video because while he apparently struggled with alcohol and lived a very fast-paced life in the Chicago music scene, He is also appreciated for his part in Big Black by his bandmates, and if he was a good enough man to them, then he deserves a mention. Also, there's a podcast episode I watched about Atomizer for this video, and Dave Riley was asked to comment a couple times by the guy doing the episode. And after the second time, Dave very politely refused. The guy asked again, and Dave told him to go screw a peanut, I think it was. I could be wrong, but it was something to that effect. And there was another Rolling Stone article reflecting on SAF 30, 40 years later or something. And Dave Riley was asked to comment by Rolling Stone. And Dave just sent back an email saying, "I hate Rolling Stone. Really love Dave Riley." Any guy who can make a comment like that with his whole chest is a guy worth remembering. Santiago is still a practicing lawyer to this day. I assume still runs around with naked ray gun in Arsenal time to time. First case ever as a lawyer was to apparently help a woman named Cynthia Plastercaster get her bronze replicas of various rock and roll artists' genitalia back from someone. Wild story, but Cynthia's collection checks out. So thank you, Santiago, for being the best lawyer she could have asked for. Steve Albini was, as a YouTube comment I read once said, allergic to hyperbole. So I won't waste your time with any here when I say Steve Albini and Big Black represented an aspect of the human condition and experience that beforehand I couldn't fathom. And I'm eternally grateful for every second of music they shared with me and all of you. Thank you for watching. This is a really big one. I'd always really wanted to talk about Big Black. I've been obsessed for a really long time, just constantly going through. I even wrote like a neat little script like I did for the last one. It's just nice to be able to geek out about a band like this. The camera crapped out in the middle, so we're gonna see if I need to redo this entire thing, and if so, maybe this will just never happen because I get frustrated and leave. Yeah, it's just really nice talking about one of my favorite bands. This is the only piece of Big Black merch I own. My wife bought this for me, and it's beautiful. This is one of my favorite records ever. Fun fact about Dave, there's a letter addressed to him on the back that's been scanned, and someone wrote, I guess when they were designing the back cover, "Bitch Magnet," with an arrow pointing to his name. Dave Riley is very fondly remembered by the boys. Santiago also said in a recent, I think it was NME, an NME article, he said that Steve Albini was a better friend than he deserved. And I just appreciate that everyone is looking back on Steve Albini with such a fondness, when for like the past 2 years I've been obsessed with him and everything he's done. And then, it comes around 3 months ago, and I wake up one morning, and the guy, like, I'm obsessed with, and I want to meet one day, but oh God, what would I even say? Has passed away. And that really rocked me for a bit, and I had to sit with that for a while, so I wanted to do this to show some appreciation for such an amazing artist, an individual. My heart goes out to his family and his loved ones, and yeah. R.I.P. Steve. I don't fear hell, because I'll know everyone. Don't expect another video anytime soon. Bye.